Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me today here on Point of View. We're going to spend some time talking about technology, an issue that we've addressed before, but in particular, we're going to talk about these technologies that are affecting our kids. And you may have heard about the book Screens and Teens. Matter of fact, I first heard about it before I even saw the book, because a friend of mine, John Stonestreet, had done a commentary about that on the Breakpoint Commentary, which, by the way, we've posted on our website today. And Dr. Kathy Koch is the author of that. We've had her on this program before. She's the president of Celebrate Kids, which is a Christian ministry based in Fort Worth, Texas. She has spoken probably in 30 different countries around the world, holds a PhD in reading and educational psychology from the Boilermakers there at Purdue University. My dad graduated from Purdue, by the way, and has been a teacher there at University of Wisconsin, Green Bay. Yes, she is a Green Bay Packer fan. I knew that a long time ago. And we're talking about this new book. It is published by Moody Press. Screens and Teens, Connecting with Our Kids in a Wireless World. We have lots of information, which I'll talk about in just a minute on our website. But Kathy, always great to have you in the studio with us.
Thank you so much. I'm thrilled to be here.
You know, we need to recognize that for young people, technology is something they've grown up with. Mm-hmm. I guess I'm the oldest around the table. I can remember a time when we typed our books on typewriters. My first 2 books were on typewriters, not computers. You know, mm-hmm. I can remember a time when all you had was a phone that was connected to the wall, and all you did was talk on the phone. Mm-hmm. But these young people are growing up, and this is, in a sense, their comfort. Actually, what I'm seeing is screen time is replacing family time, isn't it?
Yes, very good point. It will always be their default, because their brains are being wired to expect technology to be their go-to. So our default may be face-to-face communication like you and I are doing right here, yeah. And their default is going to be, give me a screen that I can look at.
Yes, and that's what they've kind of gotten used to. So in terms of face-to-face, sometimes that may be more difficult for them, won't it?
Exactly, and we have to have compassion for them, Kerby, because one of the things that I say to parents and teachers is that I would be like them if I was their age. And I really think that's true. My brain would be wired like their brains are being wired. I would be less comfortable with face-to-face. I wouldn't be as good at reading facial expressions and body language, and I might gravitate toward that isolation of the screen.
Sure.
So I want to have compassion for them, and I don't want to blame them, and I don't want them to make them feel bad. It is their is, and we need to expect that.
We're going to open up the phones a little bit later. Perhaps you have some comments or questions, but we're going to try to cover some things first. And I might just add one more disclaimer. Nobody around the table here is anti-technology. Mm-hmm. We're using technology. At the end, we're not going to gather all the cell phones and burn them in the parking lot, anything like that. We recognize that there is a real need to have some discernment. But let's, if we can, for just a minute, before we get into some of the lies in your book, talk about these core needs that young people have, all of us have, because that helps us understand why, in some respects, addiction to some of this technology is really taking place.
Very good point. For instance, security, I think, is the first core need we have. And the question is, who can I trust? Yeah. It should be met in people who are trustworthy and dependable and who follow through, certainly God of the Bible. And we've got a generation of young adults and young people who are putting their security in the speed of their internet connection, or in Google.com having the answer very quickly that they're looking for, or a score on a game that they're playing that will be higher than mom's score or a friend's score. All of that's really dangerous, of course.
Yeah, so that's the security. What's a couple more of those?
Identity, who am I?
Yeah, who am I?
And, you know, it needs to be complete, it needs to be accurate, it needs to be current. We've got some kids today, if, for instance, if all they post on social media is about horseback riding and they love their horse, then everybody thinks that that's all that they are, is a horseman. And they don't realize that they also play the clarinet and they're also on the debate team and they also enjoy their younger siblings. So it can limit their identity.
You know, you've also talked a great deal, before we get back to the other core needs, about identity. The young people today grow up with a sense in which they don't have a good self-esteem. And there are a lot of Kathy Koch messages I remember over the years at various conferences, but the one that certainly resonates with so many young people, and with me as well, is this idea of self-image. And you've talked a great deal about that. And if you base your self-image on how you look or on your abilities rather than who you are in Christ, you're going to be in a lot of trouble. And that's one of the problems that we're going to surface today, isn't it?
Absolutely. Good point.
Yeah, so again, security, identity, let's get a couple more out there on the table.
Belonging, who wants me?
Yeah.
And oh my goodness, we're supposed to place our belonging in people who are real friends with us and people we really have relationships with. It should be a quality, not a quantity thing. But a lot of young people have their security, their belonging met in how many people are in their phone or how many likes they get on social media and how quickly they come. And of course, that's dangerous because now you're letting other people tell you how you belong, and that shouldn't be that way.
So again, security, identity, belonging, two more.
And then purpose, why am I alive?
Yeah.
And Kerby, this is one of the cool things that technology can do for kids, is it can introduce them to a variety of possibilities for the ways that we can serve and volunteer and contribute to the mess that the world is in. And we can talk more about that if you'd like. And then, competence, the last one. What do I do well?
Yes.
Unfortunately, if some kids get just stuck in their screen time, all they're going to do well is play a game or do this app or whatever, and they're going to not necessarily develop the skills that they need in order to fulfill the purposes that they have. It can be dangerous. However, we also can gain a lot of competencies from technology through talk radio, through different websites and chat rooms and discussion boards and videos that we observe that give us a great set of skills.
Yes. So again, we can understand why there's a sense of addiction. There's a sense of need. It fulfills me. It gives me a sense of identity, belonging, and all the rest. We've got to come up with some alternatives, don't we? It seems to me that if indeed people are listening right now, Kathy, and they're saying, okay, you guys aren't anti-technology, but you just pointed out all the problems when my young people, teenagers or even adults, spend too much time with this technology. We've got to come up with some pretty significant alternatives, don't we?
You know, we do, and we need to teach them that quiet is good. It's when we're quiet that the ideas sift in our head, and we sort and we sift, and truth is a result of that. We can't run from quiet. We can't run from being alone. We need to teach children that being lonely and being alone are two different things, and we need to make sure that we're modeling true, fully present behavior. Kids tell me that when mom and dad have a phone in their hands, they don't feel safe. They don't feel like they're for sure going to get mom and dad's full attention. One of my friends does a really, really smart thing. If she's on the phone and one of her kids gets home from school, she says to the person, kids are home, bye, and hangs up. And the kids hear her say that. She doesn't even finish the thought. Yeah. My kids are home, goodbye. The first 30 minutes are those kids 30 minutes. And they get to talk and debrief and plan the evening. And then once the kids go off playing or begin homework, then that mom may call that person back and get back on the phone. But to prioritize our children so that they understand that they matter and that they can have our full attention. And then they're going to ask us the tough stuff. Like, Daddy, what do I do when I don't play with my phone? I don't know what to do. Yeah.
Well, and I think that's important, too, because if you create that expectation, then when they come home, they know they're going to get a chance to talk. And you don't get this, what you get around the dinner table. How was school? Fine. What, you got any homework? Yeah. Bye. You know, and that's about the 3 words that you get sometimes at the dinner table. At least that's with my son, the way it was pretty much. And so that's really important to create that context. So let's take a break. But when we come back, we're going to talk a little bit more about not only the alternatives, but we're going to talk about the 5 lies. I think you're going to find that very interesting because these 5 lies are very significant and are the things that I think drive this desire to get on a computer, to get on a smartphone. And I think you're going to benefit a tremendous amount. Kathy Koch with us today, and she has her doctorate and certainly has been running the Celebrate Kids for many years. We have a link to her website. We have a way you can order the book. We have the commentary by John Stonestreet. And we also have a link to screensandteens.com. So there's a lot of material. We'll cover that but we'll also open up the phones for your comments. All that coming up right after this.
The Point of View Commentary with Kerby Anderson.
You know, homosexual bullies have reached a new low in their call for bans and boycotts. We're all familiar with what happens when a Christian photographer, baker, or florist declines to provide services for a same-sex wedding. The homosexual couple files charges with the state, and the Christian owner has to pay a fine and is usually driven out of business. Now these bullies are taking their tactics to the next level. Consider the story of Aaron and Melissa Klein, the owners of Sweet Cakes Bakery in Oregon. It's bad enough that they had to close their business. It's worse that they also had to pay a fine of $135,000 for supposed emotional damages. But that was not enough punishment for the homosexual bullies. Christians decided to rally around Aaron and Melissa Klein by raising money for them through the GoFundMe account. Once supporters were able to raise more than $100,000 for the family-owned bakery, homosexual activists demanded that GoFundMe shut down the page because it violated the organization's policy. But these gay bullies just don't target Christians. They go after fellow homosexuals if they stray from the reservation. Two homosexual hotel owners held a small dinner in New York City with Senator Ted Cruz. They disagreed with him on many topics, including same-sex marriage, but wanted to have a dialogue with a presidential candidate. Months earlier, they hosted a Ready for Hillary event. The gay bullies were outraged that these two homosexual hotel owners had dinner with Ted Cruz and called for a boycott of their hotel. This forced a cancellation of a charity event to fight AIDS. Initially, the two hotel owners tried to defend what they did by saying, people on both sides of the aisle need to be able to communicate with one another even when they ideologically disagree. But the gay bullies were not convinced, and the hotel owners had to cave to the pressure and admit that the Cruz dinner was a terrible mistake. I think the real mistake was to think that homosexual bullies believe in open-mindedness and tolerance. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
We talked about one of the great challenges, I think, in the 21st century is technology. Technology is a tremendous benefit, but it also is something that we need to have a good control and handle on. It's something that occasionally pastors address, but not too often, and I think they are going to have to address this a lot more. And for those of you that are in ministry right now, let me very much encourage you to get a copy of this book, Screens and Teens, over 200 pages. It also has a discussion guide. So this could be something that you could use with parents. You could use it for youth. I might mention, too, that as you look at the discussion guide, it also links you to Screens and Teens. We have that link, but it gives you the password. If you buy the book, you get the password, and then you can download 9 different video series, Kathy, that you've done. So this is something that I think churches are going to have to pay attention to because, after all, think of the fact that a pastor is trying to lead a congregation with about a half an hour sermon when the average television is on more than 7 hours a day, which is like 50 hours a week. And then you have young people that are spending enormous amounts of hours in front of screens, computer screens, video screens, movie screens, or, of course, very smartphone screens. And you're trying to counteract all of that with a half an hour sermon. Lots of luck.
Exactly.
Guess who wins?
Exactly.
So these are some very important challenges, and this is one of those challenges that I wanted to have you have some great resources for. And if we could for just a few minutes, Kathy, let's talk about some of those lies. Lie number one you have is, I am the center of my own universe. That probably would have been true even if we didn't have the idea of Facebook and everything else. But it seems to me that the technology reinforces this sort of narcissism that so many people have been talking about.
You know, it's a really good point, because all of us, when we were adolescents, went through that age and that stage when we thought that the world revolved around us. So that's always a common denominator of development. However, this age group is probably not going to grow out of it, and it's lasting way longer because of what technology is teaching them. And you used a great example earlier on in the show. When you and I were young and the phone rang, we had to answer it because we didn't know who was there. We didn't have answering machines, there wasn't voicemail, and there wasn't a screen that told us who it was, so we answered it. Now, when my phone rings, I can look at it and go, oh, I'm not in the mood, and reject that person and that phone call. I can watch whatever I want on TV or on a handheld device that I have.
Well said.
When I was a kid, I watched what Dad wanted to watch.
Yeah.
I listen to the music I want to listen to that no one else even knows I'm listening to. And I can capture a song on an app that I hear in an elevator because I think it's a cool song. So the world revolves around me. Here's another example. I was at my brother's a week ago for my niece's wedding. We needed to shop for a new dryer in the midst of the weekend of the wedding. And so as a favor to them, I went to a particular website. Within 5 minutes, that website showed up on my Facebook wall. I think that's disgusting. Young people think that's really cool that they control the world.
Yes. But, okay, so we have the general kind of self-centeredness that happens in adolescence. We have the technology. Let's add one more. We have the helicopter parents or the snowplow parents that are making the kids the center of their universe as well. True?
That's very true. It is not just technology. It's this perfect storm where the parents are perhaps helicoptering rather than setting up boundaries and teaching kids independence and obedience and then letting them learn. Because you know what? They're not learning from the consequences of their mistakes because parents are there to prevent the mistake or to pick up the mess for them. And that's not right. It's not wise.
Well, again, you talk about how we respond to that. We can apologize. We can introduce them to Jesus. We can teach them about creation. We can help them understand why God created them. We can provide volunteer alternatives. All through the book, you give some very practical kinds of advice. And I like the books that have a lot of shoe leather to them. That's what this one does. You know, you really don't just say, well, here's an abstract and then go figure it out yourself. You give all sorts of really good examples if indeed you are recognizing, and how could you not, that your child is thinking that he or she is the center of the universe and really posting all sorts of pictures on Instagram and Facebook and all sorts of things. And some of our listeners are wondering if I'm speaking in tongues right now. Maybe they don't even know what some of that is, you know, but Pinterest and all the rest. These are all places that maybe require some kind of parental intervention, right?
I absolutely agree. And again, compassion as well, because we've allowed it to occur by giving them smartphones possibly before it was appropriate, or a phone with internet connections that may not have been necessary. Maybe we're not really guarding their hearts and their minds as much as we can. And here's something I think really important to think about, Kerby. Imagine a group of adolescents or even young adults under the age of 30, and they all think they're the center of their own world.
Yes. Ooh.
No wonder they're lonely.
Yeah.
Right? Because now you serve me. Your job is to make me feel like I'm the center of the universe. But you're thinking the same thing is true of me. So we sit around or we stand around and we're going to go to our screen because we don't know how to have the conversation. So we need to teach other-centeredness and the one another's of the New Testament, and that we're all important. It's not just that you're important, but we're all important and we all have value and we were all created in the image of God. All those kinds of basic biblical understandings are the antidote, I think, to some of this, which is why I so appreciate your recommending the book to the people in ministry, because it is that important.
And again, some of the practicals you have there about teaching them friendship skills and model the one another's, you know, all the places where we see one another in the scriptures and teach them how to introduce themselves. This is just chock full of practical material, but I'm going to keep the train moving because we have 5 to go through. We talked about the lie that I'm the center of the universe. How about lie number 2? I deserve to be happy all the time. Oh boy.
Yeah, have you seen that in our culture?
Of course, haven't you? Yeah.
Oh, you know, I asked parents, how many of you have kids who argue more than you ever thought yours would? And virtually every hand goes up. And then I like to say to parents, it's probably not your fault. Now, some of you may be catering to your kids a little bit too much and you're afraid of their pushback because you don't know how to deal with their anger and their I hate you statements. So you need to, as a parent, mature and handle that because it's your job to make sure the kids have proper boundaries. But I do want to say, again, with compassion, I do get that. But the Hollywood lie is, you know, you deserve to be happy all the time. For instance, everything should be easy, right? If I bring a game up on my laptop, I can win if I play long enough. So it has nothing to do with skill, has nothing to do maybe with experience, but if I just keep at it, I can win because I deserve to win because I'm amazing. And that's where I'm going to get my happiness from. Social media. Here's an example. I might write a blog and I might post it and I might think it's one of my better blogs. And so I post it and then I watch how many minutes before someone likes it.
Yeah.
How many people share it? What if I drive back to my office after this interview and I look and I go, oh, it's only been shared a few times. Maybe it wasn't that good after all. No, I need not let other people evaluate for me. Yeah, their opinion's important, but so is my own. It's a mess.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Well, and also the other part of it is there's no filter. I can remember when I first started writing newspaper columns, and they appeared in the Dallas Morning News and Houston Post and all sorts of small papers too. I could depend on the Round Rock Leader, the El Campo Press, or whatever run them, but I wasn't always sure the Dallas Morning News would run it. Now, if I post something on my blog, it's posted instantaneously. There's no person to say, okay, that's worthy of many eyes, and so there's another part of that as well that I think is missing, because now I can create my own newspaper because I have my own Facebook page and I have my own blog. And
the world revolves around you, and that keeps you happy. So everybody needs to listen to you.
Yeah.
Oh, my
One
goodness.
other one I would put up, you talk about we live in a culture of now. That is something as well, that everything is instantaneous. And I've told the story before that everybody expects things so quickly that the other day I walk in, and this is at another place, but I noticed this millennial's kind of fidgeting and everything. I said, what's up? He said, oh, the microwave's taking too long. And I thought, microwave is taking too long?
Yes.
Because we expect everything now. And that's a problem too, isn't it?
I've asked people if they've yelled at their computer because it takes them too long to boot up, and they've all admitted they have, Well, I think it's a concern because that's not how the real world works. Things that are worth having are worth working for and developing. So and again, biblically, think of the verses that talk about persevering and walking through the valley in order to get to the mountaintop. And it's in that perseverance that you develop character and hope. And most adults would admit that the things that they worked hard for, they highly value. We have the potential to have a generation of people who don't know how to work hard for anything.
That's for sure.
Because they want it now and they want it easy.
Going to take a break, but again, some very practical suggestions even there in line number 2 about helping to cultivate thankfulness, as well as helping our teens understand the difference between wants and needs. And every one of these chapters just full of practical advice, but we're coming to a break, so when we come back, we'll pick off a few more. We've already talked about a few of the lies. That is, I'm the center of my own universe, and also, of course, I deserve to be happy. When we come back, we'll talk about I must have choices. I am my own authority, and information is all I need, so I don't. So we'll get into some of that, and it is, again, going to have, I think, an impact on this generation. If you're a teacher or a parent, you have seen this. If you're a young person listening, because after all, you might be listening in today because you're not in school, this would be an opportunity for you to maybe kind of understand your world. But again, this is a book published by Moody. You can probably find it in your local bookstore, but if not, we have links to all of the websites that I think you would need to find out about. So please take the time to go to the website. You'll see the picture of Kathy there. Just scroll down and you can then find her website, drkathycook.com. We also have, of course, the link as well to screensandteens.com, as well as the Breakpoint commentary and a couple other resources that I think you will find very, very helpful. Let's take a break, though. If you'd like to join us, I might begin to open up the phones and give you a chance to join the conversation. 1-800-351-1212, 1-800-351-1212, Screens and Teens. Dr. Kathy Cook with us. We'll continue our conversation with her and with you right after this.
In late June, we will find out whether the Supreme Court is going to redefine marriage. As the Lord said in Isaiah 5, "Woe to those who call evil good and good evil." No true Christian can bless what God calls a curse, which means we need to be praying right now about how to respond no matter what the outcome. The U.S. Solicitor General admitted during oral arguments the next battleground, if marriage is redefined, will be an attack on Christian schools, colleges, and ministries of all kinds. If the justices say that gay so-called marriage is protected in the Constitution, that's the highest law of the land, and no one who disagrees will be safe, including, ultimately, our churches. Join us as we pray for America. Visit now at pointofview.net/pray. We'll send you a free Pray for America booklet prayer update. You to spend time in prayer for the nation. pointofview.net/pray. pointofview.net/pray. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again, is Kerby Anderson.
If you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. Like to know what's going on in your home. Phones today are cameras and alarms and music machines. And, of course, you've got social networking and movies and computers and all sorts of things. And so that's why we thought it would be very helpful for you to hear from Dr. Kathy Koch here. Screens and Teens, connecting with our kids in a wireless world. If you go to our website, we have a link to, of course, Celebrate Kids. And I might mention some of the books that you have in the back. We've had you on before to talk about How Am I Smart? A Parent's Guide to Multiple Intelligences. So helpful because some kids are not book smart, but they may be mechanically smart. They may be kinesthetically smart. And I think this is going to be a real encouragement to your kids. And then you and Jill Savage have written a book series, and this is one of them, No More Perfect Kids, as well as this one, Screens and Teens. And these are shorter books, so that people can really get into them and read them and learn some very practical suggestions. So again, as people go to your website or they find some of the books, what is available to them right now?
Yeah, thanks. Appreciate that so much. It's such an influence. I mean, such a privilege to be an influence, right?
Yes.
It's what all of us should be doing, and just the books are prayerfully a help to people.
Well, again, I just think, if you are interested in learning a little bit more about your kids or your grandkids, or you're concerned about some of the temptations, which we've talked about here with technology, certainly this book, Screens and Teens, is a very good help. We've talked a little bit about this idea that I'm the center of the universe, I deserve to be happy. How about number 3? I must have choices. Well, if there's one thing we've learned from sociology, as choice increases, commitment decreases, because I have more choices, so I'm less committed to any one choice. That's a problem, too. But what about this idea of choice?
Oh, my goodness. What you said is so relevant. Everything that we play with has a drop-down menu. And so their brains have been wired to expect choice.
Yes.
Those of us who are older know that choice is a privilege. And we grew up with a half a dozen breakfast cereals to choose from. Oh my goodness, look at the breakfast cereal aisle in the grocery store. It's overwhelming.
It is.
Or you go to a restaurant now, and every restaurant here where we live has to have a Mexican option. In the old days, there were Mexican restaurants you went to if you wanted that kind of food. So the choice thing has just exploded everywhere. And their brains expecting choice because of the drop-down menu effect. TV cable, the DVR, you can pause live TV and do something else for a while. All the screens that you can have open, all the songs that you can listen to. There's over 2 million websites. There's 2,000 TV cable channels, and yet there's nothing to watch.
Yeah.
And part of the issue, Kerby, that really concerns me is that they're overwhelmed by the number of choices. They say on one hand they like choice, but they don't know what to do with it all. You know why? Because they want to be happy.
Yeah.
So how do I choose something if I've never chosen it before? Because what if it doesn't keep me happy? So the big choices are really hard for them to make because they don't have a standard of right and wrong, good and bad, healthy, unhealthy, biblically moral, not biblically moral.
Yes. And again, as you point out, because they're overwhelmed, they have difficulty with making a choice. And then one of the things you suggest is you really need to help them know that it's okay to change their minds, that you need to maybe provide helpful feedback so that choosing doesn't become so overwhelming. So really, even some of the parenting skills that we needed to have in the past are still relevant, but we need to add one more, and that is with this overchoice that they're facing, parents need to help them in ways that maybe previous generations didn't have to focus on.
I think so. From all that you could do, what you want to do, what should you do, what would make you joyful, what would make you content, what would be good for others versus what would be good for you, to try to limit it for kids, to understand that it's hard for them because of their brain. Again, it isn't their fault. And I want to say to the moms and dads who are listening, take back your kitchen. You are not a short order cafeteria cook. So when you say that you're going to have tacos and a kid looks at you and goes, hey, I want a burger with that meat, or I want something else to eat. I've met so many moms who have made 3 or 4 different things for their 3 or 4 different children. No, you make what you're going to make. Now, maybe you do menu planning and you get them to help you choose on a Sunday afternoon, and they make a commitment that on Tuesday they will enjoy tacos, But I'm concerned that we keep feeding their need to be happy, and we keep feeding them this belief that they're always going to have it their way, because the world revolves around them and they deserve to be happy. Well, now they go to high school, and guess what? The teacher says the essay's due Tuesday, 500 words, blue ink, longhand. And the kid's like, no. Or they get a job when they're 25 and they have to work in a cubicle from 8 to 5 and they have to do this. Well, they'd rather be over there. Well, it doesn't work that way.
It's amazing. And again, one of the things you talk about here is really teaching them to serve. This idea of service is one of those ways to begin to learn who you are. but also very quickly it takes you out of I'm the center of the universe, right?
Absolutely. To serve and to volunteer individually is great. As a family is even better, because now you can have the conversation, and you can say as you're driving in the car or you're having Sunday dinner, you can say to your 17-year-old son, how did your heart feel when we were there at the food bank? How did your heart feel when you were there weeding the gardens for the elderly in our church who can't do it themselves anymore? And we get that conversation going, and the kids admit, hey, it did feel okay, and I didn't really miss my phone as much as I thought I would. So volunteering and serving is definitely a theme. And then that idea of cultivating gratefulness is another way that we can fight back. You know, let's be grateful for the steak and not regret we ordered it when we could have had chicken. Oh, my goodness.
Oh, yes. You got a great line there. Okay, overchoice creates something else, and that is multitasking. And that is, okay, I don't want to choose. I want to have the television on. I want to theoretically be doing my homework while I'm looking at my computer screen, but I've also got my smartphone here, and I've got 3 or 4 different windows open simultaneously, and so I'm chatting with my friends, I'm updating my Facebook, and I'm theoretically doing my homework. First of all, multitasking is a myth. You know, whatever you're focused on, you lose about 40% from the other task anyway. But back to this issue. Overchoice creates multitasking, doesn't it?
It does, Kerby, and I want to give people permission to not do it.
Yeah.
It is totally okay to do one thing at a time. And we're laughing. I've met young people who really need to be given permission to focus and permission to invest and engage in the one movie or the one book or the one conversation. Absolutely, multitasking isn't possible. It's simultaneous,
switching,
partial attention, but it's not multitasking. And we're paying a price, and that's why we're texting and driving, and we think we can get away with it. And we could talk for hours about that.
Well, but again, I think the point is well taken that this is something that parents need to establish as a principle as well, because they've seen their kids multitasking, and everybody convinces themselves that they can multitask. And the reality is no. I mean, as you said, it's partial switching of attention, and we can look at our brain studies. We know a lot more. And so people that are convinced that they can multitask are kidding themselves and maybe even putting themselves and their kids in danger, because, as you said, if they're driving, that's bad enough. But even so, if they're kidding, in a sense, giving their kids the sense that they can do that, if there's anything that teenagers do even worse than adults, that's multitasking while driving, right?
And let me say this, Kerby. I think the bottom line for me is, what does it say to the person?
Yeah.
It says to the person, you are not as important to me as this app or this book. I was at an event. I won't mention where I was. I watched a young mom feed her baby and with her other hand check Facebook with her phone. And I just grieve, because that was ideal time to connect with that baby.
Yes.
Ideal
face to
time
face.
to soothe and to touch and to cuddle and to talk. But instead, what was she teaching that child? Subtly, there's something being learned there, that thing in mommy's other hand has all of her attention. That's what concerns me.
Yeah, it does. I'll keep it moving, because the line number 4 is, I am my own authority. Of course, that makes sense, because you already have the ability to figure out what kind of latte you want to get at Starbucks and what kind of drop-down menus you want to pick and how you want to make your Facebook page look and all those kinds of things. But that's dangerous too, isn't it?
Oh, it's so dangerous. Absolutely. Those are great examples. This is a generation that's grown up with no good authority on TV or movies. If there are authority figures from Hollywood, they're usually portrayed as being idiotic. This generation has never known government, politics, education, or the church to be free from conflict and discord, and that's a sad statement to make. So they scoff at authority, and they've got Google.com and Siri on their phone and any number of other places and ways to get information. So authority, and then we've got the helicopter parent and the lawnmower snowblower parent, who's not, again, doing a good job, in our opinion, of boundaries and teaching, not telling. Kids need to be taught what to do and why to do it. We need to get back to basic black and white. There are some absolutes without apology. We are raising you. We're not raising the neighbor kid. Don't say to me everybody's doing it. That's not true. And even if they were doing it, it doesn't matter to me, because you're my son, and God gave you to me, and it's my responsibility to do a good job. And therefore, this is the standard of how we choose, and this is the standard that is authority, and you will go to your room.
Wow.
I'm not saying that's easy, and there will be pushback, but let me tell you something, Kerby. People who have heard me speak on this, who have read the book and given us feedback, have said that there's an initial pushback, and even for the parent, it's really hard to not multitask, to put the phone down, to not play the game or whatever. But within hours, the kids are coming to mom and dad and saying, I like myself better without my phone. Keep it longer.
Yeah.
Now, don't write me and say that didn't work for your family, but have hope that it can work, that we can get back to knowing each other at a more intimate heart level, and it can be good.
Well, we're going to take a break, and when we come back, a couple of things. First of all, we talked about the living in the now. You have a story about that I wanted to have people hear. And then also the last lie, information is all I need, so I don't need teachers. Yes, you do. And we all the teachers out here are going, oh, I'm so glad she's speaking to this issue. So we'll take a break and come back real quickly to finish off again our conversation today on screens and teens, connecting with our kids in a wireless world, published by Moody. We'll be back right after this.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Dr. Kathy Koch with us as we talk about her book, Screens and Teens. We've talked about the 5 core needs. We've talked about 4 of the 5 lies. But let's take a phone call just to keep the conversation going. In Ohio, Mary, thank you for joining our conversation today.
Hi.
What would you like to share with us?
I had a question for your guest. What if you are one of those snowplowing parents, but your son is an adult now and 34 years old, but still believes that his universe is, you are there, you're put there to serve him and to be at his beck and call, and is just very disrespectful all the time to you? How does a parent handle that besides on their knees praying, which is done 24/7 in this case? But what advice would you give us?
First of all, Mary, I'm so grateful that you know your son well enough to identify what the issue is. I'm really proud of you for that. And I love that you're praying. Don't ever give up on God for your son. And I think for you to have the compassion to understand that in his age and the role of technology has caused a lot of this, and for you to have compassion is going to help him hear you. And then maybe to apologize and say, hey, I heard this gal on the radio the other day on Point of View, and she made some really interesting points. And let's talk about how you believe what you believe and why it is that you believe that. And I'm going to just ask you to consider a couple of ideas and see if this talk that you're learning, maybe my book and the website, would help you have a conversation. Don't give up. Do understand that he's not a bad person for developing this idea that the world revolves around him. But you're right that it's not healthy.
It certainly isn't. Let me move along just a little bit quicker, because I did say, you had a story about telling kids about this idea of living in the now. And I think some of the stories might be helpful to Mary and some of the other parents out there, too.
I appreciate that, Kerby. When I talk to young people in youth groups or Christian school chapel or even public school opportunities, and I say, how many of you are more impatient than you used to be? And most of their hands go up, and
Sure.
They admit it. And even I'm more impatient than I used to be. I admit that. The click of the mouse and Google.com, if you will, causes us all to believe that we can have it now, if not sooner. But this is what I say to the Christian kids. I say, God's not going to rewrite the Bible for your generation. Patience will be forever and always a fruit of the Spirit. So own that and grow up and mature. And are you going to follow Christ or aren't you? And I've had kids come up to me, Kerby, and say, thank you, because I knew there was sin. I knew there was disconnect. I knew that there was something that was preventing me from wholly and fully following and connecting and being embraced by God the Father, but I couldn't identify it. And lady, you're right. That is sin to behave that way. And I think we need to call sin, sin. And even Mary with a young adult son maybe still has the authority to say, for what it's worth, this is what I think is going on here. A self-centeredness and a selfishness and an ignoring of your elders is not appropriate. In fact, God would call it sin.
Yeah, well, it's a good way to get you into it. And again, sometimes that's that tough love part that we need to be a part of, right?
When young people respect that, and how are we ever going to get them to choose for something other than happiness if we don't model for them that there's something better than happiness, which is called righteousness and joy and peace and contentment?
Yeah. Well, you could have written a book that's twice as long, but you didn't, and only because you had a word count. But at least so that we can finish this last of the lies, and there is so much more that we haven't covered. But I thought, just to be fair, lie number 5. Information is all I need, so I don't need teachers. Teachers out there going, oh, I'm so glad she's responding to this issue, because you have this mindset. In my day, it was, we got calculators. Why do we need to know our multiplication tables? Now it's, I've got Google, I've got Siri. Why do I need to know history? Why do I need to know any facts?
Exactly. Or they do want to know facts, but they're everywhere. You can watch TV and there's a split screen and a crawl across the bottom. And there's all kinds of websites to get information. What we don't have is knowledge and wisdom. And so we've got to help our kids understand that, factual information is intriguing and may have a benefit, but it's not what life is all about. But this is why teachers are having a hard time, both in church and in school. Kids want to learn what they want to learn so that they can change the world the way that they think they're supposed to change it, because the world revolves around them, and they want to be happy, and the test doesn't make them happy. And so I think this chapter, teachers have said to me, thank you, because it helps me understand why the struggle is the struggle. And maybe the discussion guide, again, used with young people, we can say, hey, look, this isn't right. This isn't the way that it's supposed to be, even though the culture has technology at the forefront.
Let's talk about that discussion guide again, because I want people to see how practical it is. I think I've given our listeners over this last hour a chance to understand that you really do bring to the fore a number of studies. We've learned a lot more about brains and teen brains and the developing brain and neuroplasticity and all that stuff. But you also have a discussion guide here, which allows you to ask a series of questions, usually about 10 questions for each one of the chapters. But then there's a downloadable video series. So when you get the book, you get the password that allows you to go to Screens and Teens and download that. So this is ideal for anybody that wanted to have something for parents and teens, or if you have a youth group right now. This is a resource that I certainly would like you to talk about for just a minute on how people in the church could use it.
Thank you so much, Kerby. We think that moms and dads in Sunday school classes and life groups, moms and dads hosting a Tuesday night in their living room, talking about it would be great. I think teens and youth leaders, teens and their parents sitting on the couch. Let me introduce the chapter with 10 minutes of powerful information. Let me be the one to bring up the tough stuff that I know moms and dads want to have conversations about. In fact, kids want to have conversations about it. A lot of young people talk to me and say, Kathy, I don't like who I've become. I don't like the like factor on social media, but I'm stuck there and I don't know what to do. If I get off, they're going to tease me and then I don't know what they're saying behind my back. So I feel like I need to stay on. It's a mess.
Yes.
And parents need to be available. And one way we can be available is through a book like this and through the video teaching that we've been able to give it. The discussion guide was written primarily with parents in mind, and yet the questions can easily be adapted for turning and talking to your son or your daughter.
And again, let me just mention that Celebrate Kids is in the back of the book, so there's some great material there. We've got a way that people can follow you on Facebook and Twitter. But let's talk about what is available at Celebrate Kids, because I know, for example, that there are people out here that might want to have you come and speak to their church, their conference, their camp. I know you're doing a camp as well, and a number of other ways in which you can take some of this material, whether it's on self-esteem, whether it's on multiple intelligence, whether it's on screens and teens, and much more. So talk about what is available for some of our listeners out there.
Kerby, thank you so much. Yeah, I'm primarily a public speaker who writes books to spread the word, and I would be so honored to go to churches, schools, conventions, community rallies, and there is information at celebratekids.com on how to arrange to bring me to your community. That would be just so much fun. I can do families together, by the way, where moms and dads and grandparents and the kids sit and talk about this. Oh my goodness, generational dynamics, where all of a sudden grandma now understands why the 16-year-old won't come to the apartment without the cell signal and why the 12-year-old is angry that the grandfather walks so slow. I mean, seriously, I've had those conversations. That would be just delightful. I have written 5 books. They're all available in our shopping cart. So are a lot of CDs and DVDs of my work. We exist to help you raise the children you were given, not the children you wish you had. We celebrate with you their identity, and we help you identify why they are who they are and how to parent them according to their design. We're so privileged.
If people go back, they can find the original interview we did with you on How Am I Smart? A Parent's Guide to Multiple Intelligences. But understand you're updating that, bringing some fresh new material. So as soon as that's ready, let's get you back on and talk about that, because lots of times young people say, well, I'm not book smart. I guess I'm not very smart. No, you may be very smart in other ways, and there are multiple intelligences, and you've done an outstanding job of articulating that as well in your books.
Thank you so much, Kerby. Well, I appreciate you and all that you do here at Point of View. It's amazing.
Well, we're going to take a break, and thank you for driving over here and being in studio. For those of you that said this went too fast, there's a couple of suggestions. Number one, get a copy of the book. We have a link there. Number two, there's a podcast that you can download. You might even think about sending that to someone else, or the live cast if you'd like to watch us in studio. And I hope you'll put it up on your website. People can find it there as well. And again, there is just a lot of resources. We did our best to cover a 250-page book in 1 hour, but we left more off the table than on the table, so that's why you need to get a copy of the book. Let's take a break. When we come back, we're going to get into some other issues, but I hope you appreciated the conversation. One last time, the book is entitled Screens and Teens, Connecting with Our Kids in a Wireless World. Dr. Kathy Koch has been with us. The foreword by Jill Savage as well, CEO of Hearts at Home. Let's take a break. We'll come back with more right after this.
Life is busy. Can you identify? We run from one event to another. We even use reminders on our computer or phone to keep from missing appointments or forgetting something vital. But have you ever considered setting a reminder to pray for the nation, for this community? The great Christian reformer Martin Luther once said he had so much to do, he was going to get up even earlier the next day to spend 3 hours in prayer. Do you pray more when you know God is the only one who can enable you to get everything done, and when He's the only one who can get what's needed done? Okay, so there's no magic number of minutes or hours to pray, but if you're not spending time with God, if you're not praying for America, that's a problem. Let Point of View remind you to pray and things to pray for. Visit us at pointofview.net/pray. Get our free Pray for America booklet and wrist reminder. pointofview.net/pray. We'll send you reminders to pray for America. pointofview.net/pray. pointofview.net/pray.
Point of View will continue after this.
I just thank God for y'all. I listen to you every day, truly. I wanted to thank y'all for everything you do each day to inform Christian families and our community about the things we can do, and just the way you're so informative. I listen to you daily and love you guys and appreciate you so much.
God bless you, Kerby, for keeping this show so on track and for the decades of wonderful help to this nation that Point of View has been. We're all big fans of your work, and we pray that God will just prosper it.
As a Christian, over the years that I've followed this program, I am constantly challenged to be on guard and to evaluate what's going on. And if for no other reason, to protect the caliber and the truth of your programming, I need to participate and to back your program financially to ensure that the truth stays out there for people to hear, to view, and to be a part of.
This is Point of View Radio.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, friends and society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
You might remember when we were talking about the conference that was held recently on poverty at Georgetown University, how the president was somewhat critical about evangelical groups that were spending, he felt, too much time talking about abortion and same-sex marriage and things like that, and seemed to be obsessed with what he called reproductive issues and really weren't focusing on poverty. Of course, I've done some commentaries, and we've talked about poverty even last week in another program about the fact that if you look at groups like World Vision and World Relief and Food for the Hungry and Samaritan's Purse, and it goes down a long, long list, I think Christians individually and collectively have done a great deal, but that doesn't mean we can't do some more. And so we want to spend a little bit of time today talking about this book, Possible, a Blueprint for Changing How We Change the World. Stephan Bauman is with us. He is the president and CEO of World Relief. He actually left a career in a Fortune 100 company to go to Africa, where he directed relief and development programs and led World Relief's global programs. He holds degrees from Johns Hopkins University, Wheaton College, University of Wisconsin. He's a poet, an author, an ordained minister, and strategist, and joins us now by phone. So, Stephan, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Thank you. It's an honor to be with you, Kerby, and great to join you today.
One of the things we talked about is how many organizations, including yours, that have been doing a great deal of good. And if nothing else, we want to educate our listeners, if not some of the people and members of Congress and other places, about what we can and should do. But your book is really challenging us to do much more. You've got a section on recovering our call, reframing the problem, remaking the world. And in the short time we have together, I thought we might talk about this idea of calling, because if indeed we pursue the calling that God has called for us, it seems to me that as we look around the world, there's a lot more to do, and God has maybe entrusted us with more gifts and abilities than maybe we even realize.
Yeah, I appreciate your opening comments. I think followers of Jesus have done amazing things around the world on poverty and issues, and there are some cases we've been slow to the party, but in many cases we've led and played significant leadership role in some of these critical issues. I think anti-trafficking is one of them, and even HIV/AIDS in the 80s and 90s. So lots of good stuff there. In terms of calling, you know, I think all of us are called, and a lot of us don't realize it. We tend to think that calling is for certain people, maybe clergy, maybe the professional like myself. And so what about, you know, so many people that are artists and entrepreneurs and business folks and, you know, moms and dads, and what is it that we can do? So a major part of my book is sort of recovering that calling, that's serving the most vulnerable, the least of these, whether in our backyards, in our communities, in our neighborhoods, in our cities, or across the world. There is something we can all do, and it doesn't necessarily mean we leave our day jobs. It doesn't mean we have to even take a trip or a missions trip. But there is something we can do, and that's a major part of the pathway of the book. And I do believe that. I believe that faith, there really is no following Jesus unless we really intersect with those he calls the least of these. So it's for all of us.
Well, and again, I think you do a good job in the book of reminding us that the people that we call heroes now didn't look like it then. St. Francis of Assisi, you talk about William Wilberforce, Martin Luther, and Mother Teresa, but, you know, let's take Bible characters as well. I mean, David was a shepherd and Mary a peasant teenager, and you talk about, for example, Harriet Beecher Stowe, who writes Uncle Tom's Cabin. Where these are people that, if you really looked at it from a human point of view, would say, that's not human potential here. That's not hero potential. This is just an ordinary individual. They don't have any extraordinary gifts. And I think it is helpful to us, Stephen, that each one of us listening to this broadcast can be part of dealing with the issues of our day and maybe following God's call and being completely outside of our comfort zone.
It's true, and I think sometimes the question, even I ask the question, where do you start? It's so overwhelming. You watch the newscast about Nepal or the stories about little girls being stolen from their homes and trafficked. Start by just praying a simple prayer. God, what is it that you want me to focus on? And maybe take the challenge that I took, 20 years ago, which is to pray for one thing, for 30 days straight. And it can be short. I was, at the time, reading the newspaper every day after I was reading the Bible and had a cup of coffee, and in the news every day was the Balkans War. Mm-hmm. And so I said, great, this is it. I'm going to pray about this once a day for 30 days, and I did. And it radically changed my life. I thought, wow, first of all, there's so much I learned, and I took the newspaper into my prayers and actually recovered sort of the lost art of lamenting. Lamenting sounds like a real sad thing, but it's not necessarily all sad. It's actually getting real honest with God and clinging to His promises that He's going to do something about sort of the story of despair. In this case, it was the Balkans for me. And my story was years later. We ended not years later. It was actually a couple of years later. We ended up going to the Balkans and doing some work there, some aid work. That's kind of how we got involved in the things that we're involved in today. And so would it be that we all just say, God, what's that one thing? I'm willing to say yes. You tell me what it is. Take 30 days, pray about it. And let the God of the universe that we serve surprise us. And I think every person that takes that challenge will be surprised. The people they meet, maybe right here at home, maybe in your community. Other people and out in the virtual, sort of space of Facebook and the blogs that are actually working on the same issue that you will meet. And before long, you find yourself in conversations that are pretty surprising and could be very impacting as well.
I would certainly agree. You talk about recovering the call, but also reframing the problem. And one of the things you talk about is 6 impossibilities before breakfast. Of course, that comes from Alice in Wonderland and Lewis Carroll. But you get into this idea we cannot do good without God. And it does seem to me that we certainly need to be about dealing with poverty relief, certainly be involved in some of these areas of social justice, certainly be concerned with humanitarian action. But I do believe that Christians have an answer that you don't get in the secular world, because we recognize individuals are created in the image of God. We recognize the issue of grace, and we also recognize that some of these problems do have a spiritual origin, right?
They do. I'd say first that any good that is done, I really truly believe that it is given by God. So, the whole idea, the theological principle of common grace, there are thousands of people, I meet them all the time, that are doing good things. And I'll say, why do you do this? You don't follow Jesus like we do. We have a set of values, but you're doing the same thing. Well, I'm doing this because I'm human. I'm doing this because I want to do something for my brother or my sister. And that's all well and good, but I would argue, and I argue somewhat in the book, that really comes from generations of a Judeo-Christocentric value system, number one. Number two, there is such a thing as common grace. God gives to human beings, even the people that don't follow Him, this notion of, hey, I want to help someone else. So that's number one. Number two, those of us who follow Jesus and believe in the saving grace of God and believe, as you say, that every human being is created in the image of God, it's a wholly different thing. It's very different for someone like Mother Teresa to look upon a person who's dying in the streets of India and say, you know what, I see the disguise of Jesus in that person because I see the image of God. That's very different than someone who says, I'm just doing this out of the goodness of my heart because I'm human. And so there's something powerful there about following Jesus. And of course, then we bring together both the eternal and the temporal as we serve them.
Take a break and continue our conversation right after this.
The Point of View Commentary with Kerby Anderson.
You know, homosexual bullies have reached a new low in their call for bans and boycotts. We're all familiar with what happens when a Christian photographer, baker, or florist declines to provide services for a same-sex wedding. The homosexual couple files charges with the state, and the Christian owner has to pay a fine and is usually driven out of business. Now these bullies are taking their tactics to the next level. Consider the story of Aaron and Melissa Klein, the owners of Sweet Cakes Bakery in Oregon. It's bad enough that they had to close their business. It's worse that they also had to pay a fine of $135,000 for supposed emotional damages. But that was not enough punishment for the homosexual bullies. Christians decided to rally around Aaron and Melissa Klein by raising money for them through the GoFundMe account. Once supporters were able to raise more than $100,000 for the family-owned bakery, homosexual activists demanded that GoFundMe shut down the page because it violated the organization's policy. But these gay bullies just don't target Christians. They go after fellow homosexuals if they stray from the reservation. Two homosexual hotel owners held a small dinner in New York City with Senator Ted Cruz. They disagreed with him on many topics, including same-sex marriage, but wanted to have a dialogue with a presidential candidate. Months earlier, they hosted a Ready for Hillary event. The gay bullies were outraged that these two homosexual hotel owners had dinner with Ted Cruz and called for a boycott of their hotel. This forced a cancellation of a charity event to fight AIDS. Initially, the two hotel owners tried to defend what they did by saying, people on both sides of the aisle need to be able to communicate with one another even when they ideologically disagree. But the gay bullies were not convinced, and the hotel owners had to cave to the pressure and admit that the Cruz dinner was a terrible mistake. I think the real mistake was to think that homosexual bullies believe in open-mindedness and tolerance. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Stephan Bauman with us for a few more minutes as we talk about his book, Possible, a blueprint for changing how we've changed the world. And it is published by Multnomah. Look for it in your local bookstore. But we also have a link to his website and information so that you can order the book if you'd like to know more about it. Again, he is the president and CEO of World Relief. We're going to talk more about that organization in just a minute. Broken down into sections on recovering our call, as well as reframing the problem and then remaking the world. Before we leave that last one, though, I thought I might pull out some quotes that you have from Dietrich Bonhoeffer. A lot of us have been reading a lot more about Dietrich Bonhoeffer, I think in large part because of Eric Metaxas' book. But in his Cost of Discipleship, Dietrich Bonhoeffer said, what does it really mean to be a Christian? He said, for him, Jesus that is, he says the hallmark of being a Christian is the extraordinary. And the extraordinary in this sense is something that people do. And it must be done. So it seems to me that if we're really serious about being followers of Jesus Christ and really understanding what it means to be disciples, that requires us to pursue that calling and to find some area where we can use those gifts and talents as God has put in our hands in an effective and meaningful way.
I love Dietrich Bonhoeffer, and then you mentioned Metaxas, another book that has come out by Charles Marsh called Strange Glory, The Life of Dietrich Bonhoeffer, which is a really good one as well. You know, when Dietrich talked about extraordinary acts or doing extraordinary things, I think there's something really important there. Years ago when people went abroad to Africa, we know these stories, they're sort of legend now. They took the coffin with them and expected to die there. Well, that's a little daunting for us today, but basically what that said is this is everybody would ask, why? How could you do this? and the confession of faith as a result. Hey, I'm doing this to serve my brother and my sister. I'm doing this because I'm following Jesus. Well, when we go abroad today and get in a plane, no one's going to ask that question today. And so the question I ask, and I call this, I refer to this as a beautiful collision in the book in terms of how change begins and sparks, these extraordinary acts that Dietrich talks about. What are those things today? What does it mean for us today to do something that is so out there? It doesn't have to do with, where we go to church or what we say. All those things are really good, but those extraordinary deeds that stop people in their tracks, and they say, wow, this is something so radical that I have to ask you, why are you doing this? I have some friends in Rwanda where we lived for a while, and she married the other tribe, and they had to flee. And when they came back to the country, she realized that most of her family had been killed. And she started praying about the people who killed her family. And she knew where they were. She knew what prison they were in. And she finally, after a couple of years, it took her a long time, got enough courage to go and meet them. She met them. And then she asked the authorities if they could be let off of their prison sentence early. They could be forgiven, as it were. And then she took a step further. She said, I'll ask them, I want them to be released under one provision, that they are allowed to come, or they are required to come to my house once a month, Sunday after church, their extended family with my extended family, and we get to know each other. We build a friendship, and we form a relationship of love and community together. That is an extraordinary act along the lines of what Dietrich is talking about. You can't look at that and not say, how and why would you ever do that? And then the answer really is only Jesus.
Only Jesus. Very powerful. Just before I run out of time, I wanted to get into the section on remaking the world. And in particular, you help us with some very practical things about vision mapping. And I've always wanted to have someone address that issue, how passion, wisdom, vision, and a fellowship of friends come together. Obviously, you have to see some of the diagrams in the book to understand it, but help us understand if individuals right now are saying, I'm trying to figure out what God wants me to do. Maybe it's a mission field. Maybe I'm going to go into ministry. Maybe I'm going to be in the business world, but I want to use short-term missions to reach out to others. But I'm trying to figure out what makes me tick. How do you kind of help people put that together in a way that makes sense in terms of their calling?
Yeah, I think so often, when we think of calling, we think of something mystical and lightning strikes like Martin Luther or writing on the wall like Daniel in the Bible, when I think it's often very practical. So first, as I said before, just taking the 30 days, saying, God, what is it that you want to break my heart with? What is the one thing you want me to focus on and pray? And even lament, as it were. And as you come out of that season with, hey, this is a big deal to me. I just can't not do something about this one thing. On the heels of that, I think it's really important to get very practical, and that is ask three questions. What is it that I have a passion for? What are my passions in life? And be really practical. I love to run. I love to spend time with my kids. I love being in the woods. I love art. I love poetry. Whatever it is, list those things. Then list where you have wisdom. And this includes degrees in study and knowledge, but it also includes the kind of wisdom that comes from the school of hard knocks and just living life. What is it that you have wisdom in? And then thirdly, where's your network of friends, whether that's in your own community, at school, at work, or virtually on Facebook and so on. And if you put all those things on a piece of paper, then start drawing intersections between the three. And you'd be surprised what you find out, right? Even have somebody come and look at it with you and say, hey, wow, you've got this going on and this going on. And you connect those three things to your lament, or the thing you can't live, you can't not do something about. And suddenly, out of that very practical exercise, and the book kind of walks you through that, you'll find that there's very tangible calling, as it were, and joining others to do something about some of those big, bad, evil things that we sometimes feel we can't do anything about. And here we are, able to actually impact the world.
Well, again, it's very helpful. And again, people just trying to sort of figure out what God may be asking them or calling them to do. Certainly that section there in the book is very helpful. Before we run out of time, I wanted to have you for just a minute talk about World Relief and talk about how people can participate with you, because as you have already pointed out, there are ways that people can connect with other friends, but they might want to connect with your organization. And so as we have a link to your website and some other things, what can people find when they land on the website?
The World Relief began years ago, and with a very simple promise, which is to help connect people all across churches around the world, serve the most vulnerable. And so we do a lot of different things, from community health and helping moms and babies survive past the age of 5. We deal with hunger and disease. We deal with opportunity for people wanting to start businesses in microfinance and agriculture. Any place where there's vulnerability, we have some solutions there, and the local church is at the center. So very easy to get connected with any one of those countries or those issues, whether it's anti-trafficking or hunger, or even right here in our local communities, the poverty that we see in some of our neighborhoods and cities. Just go to our website at worldrelief.org, and you can find a lot of things there, from understanding, learning, volunteering, interning. We'd love to get engaged with you.
I might just mention again, this book is published by Multnomah, and it is something that goes into about 200 pages, has some great appendices so that you can kind of figure out a little bit more about what God might be leading you to do. But how would you suggest, Stephen, before I let you go, maybe churches or small groups could use this book in a way to challenge members and participants to consider what God would have them do in their life?
It's a great book for group study, for rethinking how we're engaging. It really builds off of a good friend of mine, Brian Fickert's book, When Helping Hurts. And in fact, it's been in my inbox. I got to put it up on the website, possiblebook.com. Some group studies, some sermon guides, and so on that might be helpful to those who want to study it in church or in groups. So I'll put that up. Actually, now that we're talking about it, I'll put it up tomorrow, so it'll be up on the website for your folks.
Well, again, World Relief, and he is the president and CEO. And Stephen, I appreciate you writing the book, and thank you for giving us some time today here on Point of View.
Thank you, Kerby. Thank you for everything you do.
We're going to take a break, and when we come back, open line in this last half hour. We certainly have lots to cover here, and I guess we have to say just a little bit about Caitlyn Jenner, because that's certainly been in the news, so we'll talk about that. A couple of other stories I wanted to put on the table, and if you'd like to join us in this last half hour, of course, we'll give you that opportunity. 1-800-351-1212, and we'll certainly finish off as quickly as we can this last half hour, but again, an open line for some of your comments, and certainly there will probably be a number, so we'll take those calls in just a minute. And as we go to the website, don't forget we've got links to some of the resources we've been talking about today, my commentary on homosexual bans and boycotts, as well as our Take Action section, our video, and as I mentioned yesterday, we're still challenging you to consider what you would do to pray for America. Yesterday, I spent some time in the second hour talking about the challenge that we face here in less than 30 days with a Supreme Court decision that is coming down. So we'll talk about what that means and how that could affect you. But also we want to give you a chance to link arms with and link hands with other individuals praying across the nation. We certainly encourage you to do that. You can go to our website, pointofview.net, click on the button that says Pray for America, and join our campaign. We'll take a break. We'll come back with more right after this.
In late June, we will find out whether the Supreme Court is going to redefine marriage. As the Lord said in Isaiah 5, "Woe to those who call evil good and good evil." No true Christian can bless what God calls a curse, which means we need to be praying right now about how to respond no matter what the outcome. The U.S. Solicitor General admitted during oral arguments the next battleground, if marriage is redefined, will be an attack on Christian schools, colleges, and ministries of all kinds. If the justices say that gay so-called marriage is protected in the Constitution, that's the highest law of the land, and no one who disagrees will be safe, including, ultimately, our churches. Join us as we pray for America. Visit now at pointofview.net/pray. We'll send you a free Pray for America booklet, prayer updates, and a wrist reminder urging you to spend time in prayer for the nation. pointofview.net/pray. pointofview.net/pray. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Final half hour, if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. You know, yesterday we talked about the fact that later this month, the Supreme Court will deliver its decision on the issue of same-sex marriage. And in just a minute, I want to get into what has happened to an individual that we all knew as a very outstanding athlete who is now saying, no, you call me Caitlyn Jenner. So we'll talk about that in just a minute as well. But I think in some respects, some of these cultural changes are happening whether the Supreme Court rules or not. But again, for those of you that were not with us yesterday, let me at least mention that we are really encouraging you now that we are in the month in which the Supreme Court no doubt will rule on the issue of same-sex marriage. It is certainly important to pray about that. I think we can also pray about Mr. Jenner as well, and we'll get into that in just a minute. The concern is this. The Supreme Court probably will do one of two things. Either it will rule that same-sex marriage is a right, and they will do that, no doubt, by perhaps saying that the various statements and constitutional amendments that establish marriage between one man and one woman are unconstitutional because they violate the Equal Protection Clause. Now, for those of you that aren't constitutional scholars, the Equal Protection Clause is part of the 14th Amendment. When was the 14th Amendment actually enacted? Well, it was enacted to actually give equal protection to African Americans. And what the court would really sort of have to justify is to say that the sponsors of the 14th Amendment and those who ratified the 14th Amendment actually, though they implemented this to make sure that they would make sure that African Americans would have equal protection, in the back of their minds, they also wanted to make sure that homosexuals someday would have the right to be married and that they would not be treated any differently than heterosexual couples. And, of course, that's a stretch, but, of course, the court won't have to actually make that case. It'll simply establish with a stroke of the pen that it violates the Equal Protection Clause. But here comes the rub. Once you have an amendment, or once in this case you have a right that actually says that you have a fundamental right for homosexuals to marry, then that constitutional right has to come up against other constitutional rights, and we don't have to guess as what happens. Oftentimes that right trumps other rights like free speech and freedom of association. And even today, if you have listened to or read my commentary, we point out what happens when various gay activists, or gay bullies as I call them, go after an individual that declines to bake a cake for a same-sex wedding, and even then goes after the attempts by Christians to provide funds for them to pay the penalty. And so we certainly can see that taking place. So the more likely possibility is that the Supreme Court will strike that down. But as many callers mentioned even yesterday, we should believe that God can change the hearts of individuals, including Supreme Court justices. If that's the case, then they might simply say that this was an overreach, and they may then simply push the question back to the various states, which means that then the real turmoil will be taking place in the state legislatures and will take place where you have various courts and legislatures trying to sort all of that out. I don't think that's as reasonable a possibility, simply because you've had many states which had a state constitutional amendment defining marriage between one man and one woman. But on the other hand, then you had federal courts actually say that people could get married. What would that then say to those people that were married if indeed the Supreme Court would rule against them? And so we will have to see what unfolds. But one of the reasons we encourage you to actually pray for America is certainly this Supreme Court decision. Another action, of course, is also to pray for what is happening in our culture. And for those of you that do not remember the story, I think it's worth going back to 1976 when Bruce Jenner was able to win an Olympic medal, an Olympic gold medal in the decathlon. Now, if you're not familiar with the decathlon, that is a very brutal series of events in track, which involve a number of different running events, as well as everything from high jumping, pole jump, and all sorts of things. And he, at a time, was kind of America's hero. This was only a few years after Watergate. There was a sense of decline. Richard Nixon had left. Gerald Ford was in office. It was in the midst of kind of a campaign, which eventually led to the election of Jimmy Carter. There was a malaise in America, and yet here, where on the Olympics in the stadium there in Montreal, we have this American who did extremely well, and then literally ran around the stadium with an American flag in his hand. It was one of those kind of seminal events that were so significant. And as a result, to go from that to, of course, the cover of Vanity Fair, I think illustrates that we have certainly seen a remarkable change, not only in him, but perhaps even in the culture as well. And I'd love to get your comments. 1-800-351-1212. If you haven't seen it, it's kind of hard to imagine that you haven't. All the Facebook pages are posting it. Of course, Vanity Fair has a picture of Call Me Caitlin on the very front for the July issue. The picture shot by the magazine's longtime photographer, Annie Leibovitz, and the story is basically a promotion of the transgender issue. Also, Jenner joined Twitter as Caitlin with the message, "Welcome to the world, Caitlin." He said, she says, hi, he, she, what do we say here? "I'm so happy after such a long struggle to be living my true self. Welcome to the world, Caitlin. Can't wait for you to get to know her or me." Within hours, of course, then we had all sorts of record-shattering posts. Most of those, of course, congratulatory, others not. He said, "If I was lying on my deathbed and I'd kept this secret and never ever did anything about it, I would be lying there saying, I just blew your entire life." And so, of course, as you might imagine, GLAAD, which is the civil rights organization that monitors kind of the depiction of homosexuals in the media, praised Jenner for accelerating acceptance of transgender people everywhere. They said for a transgender person to step into the world as his or her authentic self is a moment of tremendous freedom. You know, it occurred to me that I might have taken the time to pull together all sorts of the research that has been done over the years, raising real questions about how healthy individuals who go through sex changes are and what are some of the mental consequences, the suicide rates and all of the rest. And then it simply occurred to me that if we don't as a culture have enough common sense to say something disturbingly wrong with what is happening here, I'm not sure all the facts and figures are going to make any difference. But nevertheless, we can certainly get into that. But at the same time, we have to recognize that the homosexual community has been relatively successful. I mean, it used to be about so-called gays and lesbians, and then you began to see that it was LGBT, all sorts of other things. Now you have Q on the end of it, and the reason is that because in some respects the homosexual community has been so successful in getting same-sex marriage somewhat normalized in the culture, it's generally accepted by the younger generation. They almost needed a new cause, and so transgender has become kind of the new cause. And so as a result, we are probably going to be subjected to more of this over time. But I'd love to get some of your comments about what is happening. And if you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. Let's go first to Illinois, WPEO. Daryl, thank you for joining us today.
Hello, I want to ask a question. I wonder if you could tell me if I'm missing something. A few years ago, Apple has these apps that different websites, organizations can use to connect mobile devices to their website. And I think it was the Manhattan Institute, Chuck Colson's group, Focus on the Family. You know, Apple decided, or I think it was Steve Jobs, okay, we're not going to give it to these people because we don't agree with their view on same-sex marriage. It seems to me that's a parallel or similar to a baker not wanting to participate in something they disagree in with a cake or am I missing something? Aren't those kind of the same?
Well, and first of all, let me point out, we did talk about that, and that is a situation in which we actually spent some time talking with Craig Parshall, who at that time was legal counsel for the National Religious Broadcasters, and pointing out that there is kind of in the social media sense of censorship there. And again, I think one of the parallels is that in both cases they said, well, we're not going to allow you to do such and such because we had some question. One, of course, because of homosexuality, one in, if you will, opposition to it. But I think the difference, which I think is somewhat significant, is let's take our Oregon baker. They actually said, well, there's one down the street that would be glad to do so. And there was no harm to an individual going down the street and getting another baker. There is a harm when they say, nope, we're not going to let anybody have access to your app. So while I see the similarities, I also recognize there's some very significant differences. And again, it's a free market. Apple is free to say we won't allow your app, and we're free to decide whether we'll ever buy another Apple product. That's the free market. We'll be right back.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Like to join a conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Transition from William Bruce Jenner to Caitlyn Jenner, and it's already been a transition on Wikipedia and everywhere else. So again, I guess we refer to him, now her, Caitlyn Jenner, an individual that won a gold medal at the Pan American Games in 1975, won a gold medal at the Olympic Games in 1976 in the decathlon, one of the really great athletes we've had in Olympic history, and certainly very significant in terms of the impact that he had during the 70s and even early 80s. Now, of course, making the full transition and on the cover of Vanity Fair. Your comments, 1-800-351-1212. Let's go to Arkansas KNEO. And Joanna, thank you for joining our conversation today.
Hi, I was going to talk about Mr. Jenner.
Uh-huh.
I guess I live a sheltered life. I just heard about it yesterday, I guess. And I couldn't believe the same guy that used to be on the cereal box of Wheaties when I was a kid.
Yeah, I mean, if those of us who are older remember seeing him on all the Wheaties boxes. Of course, they were over a time posting various athletes on the Wheaties boxes, but this one perhaps one of the more significant ones because in 1976, America was kind of at a lull, and this was a time when we were running into various problems with oil shortage, gas, economic problems, inflation very high. It was a few years after Watergate, the resignation of a president, and all sorts of things happening. And as a result, I think he was the very significant high point, and many of us actually remember seeing him on the cereal boxes, participating sometimes in television programs, very prominent individual who then kind of faded away. And I think it was interesting. You're keeping up with the Kardashians, put him back in the public eye. And that, in some respects, gave those who wanted to promote transgenderism a possible icon. I mean, there is a part of me that in the back of my mind wonders if some of this might have been manipulated a little bit so that it could promote it. But nevertheless, yeah, because if this had happened now, a lot of people said, do any of you remember the Olympic athlete back in 1976? And some of us that were a little bit older would remember. A lot of people say, I don't know who he is. And it wouldn't have made the cover of Vanity Fair. But nevertheless, it's cover right now, and that's why I think we're going to be hearing about this for some time. Let's go back to the phones, and in California, KYCC. Ray, what would you like to add to the conversation?
I'd just like to add that this is a slap to the face to God, because we know God doesn't make mistakes. He made Bruce Jenner a male for a reason, using him to establish American as an icon and a hope. I was born in 1977, but I still remember a few years later, when 85 and 87, he was still around as an American legend and athlete. So for him to go along and do this, and I kind of agree with what you're saying of being manipulated and using him as a stepping stool to promote this agenda. But in the long run, he wants to be happy. When we step out of God's will and start to do our will for happiness, we're going to have to face the judgment one day, which God is going to remind us what we chose instead of choosing him.
Very well said. You know, again, I see so many people that oftentimes are trying to justify their sin, their actions by, well, God made me happy. God wants me to be happy. And again, the concern is, if you've looked at any of the statistics, maybe we'll bring these to the table, there are many, and there are counselors who would necessarily not maybe criticize what choices people made in the homosexual community, who nevertheless would say what's happening in the transgender area is of deep concern. And I just think if you have any kind of discernment at all, you would have to say this is pretty tragic, and this deserves treatment, that deserves compassion, that deserves maybe seeking out some solutions other than the radical surgery that these individuals have performed on themselves and that Bruce Jenner has performed on himself. But let's take just a few more phone calls real quickly. We'll go to Olympia in Georgia, WLPE. What would you like to add to the conversation?
I just wanted to say that I don't believe that we should acknowledge and call Bruce Caitlin. Yeah, as I was mentioning, you can put an orange peel on a tomato, but you're not going to have an orange on the inside. And really and truly, I think it's a disgrace to women. To be a woman is so much and is so beautiful. And for a man to go through everything that he went through, with the exception of, getting rid of his genitalia, that will never make him a woman. And yes, we should have compassion, and they do need treatment. I mentioned something to a friend who said, well, the suicide rate among people in that lifestyle is so high, and it's because of people like me. And it's not because of people like me. It's because they've chosen to buy into the lie that Satan has put on the table that, unless you do whatever whim the wind blows your way, then you're not going to be who you were intended to be. He is who he was intended to be as Bruce Jenner. And I really don't believe that we need to acknowledge this individual as Caitlyn Jenner. There's no such person. This is a made-up, why don't you call him Superman, or Superwoman?
Good
for
point.
something.
And I think your point's well taken. I mean, even if we got to a point where there was complete acceptance of transgender behavior, and you can go to other countries around the world where there is more acceptance than maybe there is here in the United States, you still have just astronomically high suicide rates. So I get so tired of this. Well, it's suicide rate so high because of you judgmental people. We've had a social experiment taking place in Europe for some time where this might be much more acceptable than it is here in the United States. Suicide rate's still high. But let's take one last phone call, and then we'll get into some other issues tomorrow. Steve, you have the floor, and you have the last comments. Calling again from KBJS in Texas. What would you like to add?
Hey, Kerby. Well, I just believe that it's a mental health issue and that it's not being addressed properly. And it's just, it's obvious that for the suicide rate to be so high in that circle, that it's an obvious mental health issue and it's not being seriously addressed. It's more, it being addressed as more of a whim than anything else.
Yeah, I think so. And again, we'll have future conversations perhaps on sexual readjustment surgeries and all those kinds of things. But the point I'm making is certainly one that we talked about yesterday, the need for us to pray for America. We certainly have a Supreme Court decision coming down that is of concern. And so that's prayers that really need to take place as we look at what is happening in our legal system. This issue with Bruce Jenner and, quote, Caitlyn is an example of what is happening in kind of the popular culture, but both arenas deserve and need our prayers. And so, again, if you can join with us in our Pray for America campaign, we really encourage you to do so. If you'd like to know a little bit more about some of the things we've talked about today, or like to listen to them again, we have the podcast available to you. My commentary today is on homosexual bans and boycotts, which relates a little bit to the conversation we had just a few minutes ago about that with Daryl. And again, if you would like to join with us in our Pray for America campaign, it's also available at the website pointofview.net. Please take the time to find some of those resources. You can also, of course, follow us on Facebook. We have a picture of the interview we did in studio today with Dr. Kathy Koch, and certainly there are ways in which you can follow us even as we go off the air, and follow us as well on Twitter. So all of it is available at the website pointofview.net. Tomorrow we're going to spend a little bit of time looking at these reports that talk about the decline of Christianity. Are we really at the end of Christianity, or maybe have people misinterpreted some of the surveys? So we'll be talking about that. Get into Israel and Iran in the second hour. We've just got lots more to cover this week, so please take the time to join us. I want to thank Andrew, Catherine, and Chris for their help behind the scenes. We'll see you back here tomorrow.
If you are like me, and like most people, I guess, I bet you have a bunch of ways to remind yourself of things. We have alarm clocks to help us get up on time, reminders on our calendars, in our computers and tablets and smartphones, reminders about meetings, reminders to pick up the kids, to pray for the country, to make sure you don't miss your anniversary or special birthdays. Wait a minute. Do you get reminders to pray for America? Or maybe you don't think the country needs God's intervention. No, I know that's not it. We set up reminders for so many things, but be honest, do you ever find that time for prayer gets crowded out by all of those other very important things? I know you're busy, and that's why I want you to do one simple thing. Visit pointofview.net/pray. Sign up. We'll send you a free booklet titled Pray for America. You'll get occasional updates on important issues to pray for, a little wrist reminder, all designed to urge you into the Father's presence to pray His mercy on America. Pointofview.net/pray. Pointofview.net/pray. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.